She stood on the edge of a dream, her heart racing, knowing full well that it might all come crashing down. The woman had made a choice, a bold, risky, and perhaps foolish one. Against every bit of advice, against logic and reason, she had bought the horse. But not just any horse. This was an untrainable, wild creature from miles away. It was an impulse decision, driven by something deeper than logic. There was a pull in her heart, a force she couldn't ignore. The kind of feeling that whispered, "What if?" Everyone told her she was making a mistake. They warned her the horse would never be tamed. They spoke of its violent nature, of how it had broken several trainers and caused chaos on the farm it came from. "You don't want that kind of trouble," they said. But in her mind, it wasn't about the horse at all. It was about something more. Something unspoken. Maybe it was the challenge. Maybe it was the chance to prove something to herself. Maybe she just needed a reason to believe in herself again. And so, there it was. The horse arrived, delivered to her front gate, a towering animal with eyes filled with distrust. The moment she saw it, she knew this wasn't going to be easy. Its coat was thick with dust from the long journey, its hooves kicking up dirt as it snorted, eyes wild and unsettled. She knew nothing about training horses, but she knew something about fighting for what you believed in. And in this moment, she believed she could change it. Standing there, looking at the beast that seemed to represent every struggle she had ever faced, a sense of fear mixed with excitement filled her chest. Could she do it? Could she turn this horse around when so many before her had failed? As she approached, the horse didn't back away. It stood still, its gaze unwavering. She took a deep breath and stepped closer, her hands trembling as she reached for its mane. And then, as she made contact, the horse shook its head violently and pulled away. The power behind the movement took her by surprise, and for a moment, she stumbled back. The horse snorted in disdain, as if it knew she wasn't the one who would be able to make it bend to her will. But in that instant, something shifted in her. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't going to let this creature's resistance stop her. Her heart pounded harder. This was her chance to prove to herself, and to everyone who doubted her, that she could do something no one else could. She pulled herself up, wiping the dirt from her hands, and without a word, she walked toward the barn. Inside, she could feel the weight of the decision pressing on her. What was she doing? The odds were stacked against her, but something told her it was worth it. She had nothing to lose. The horse seemed to know the battle was on. It turned its head toward her, its eyes full of defiance. The barn suddenly felt much smaller, and the air, heavier. Was this truly the beginning of something extraordinary, or was it the first step into a world of failure? As she stood there in the barn, facing the creature that had already rejected her, she thought about what lay ahead. Days, weeks, maybe months, of struggle. But also, the possibility of triumph. A possibility that no one else saw, but that she believed was there, just waiting to be discovered. The truth was, she had no idea how to train a horse. She had no experience, no manual to follow, no expert by her side. She only had the belief that there was something inside both her and the horse that, if they could find it, could change everything. And that's when the voice inside her heart spoke clearly. What happens next will shock you. She didn't know how it would happen or what it would take, but deep down, she was sure of one thing: this horse wasn't just a wild animal. It was a symbol. A test. A chance to prove that with enough faith, trust, and determination, even the wildest dreams could be tamed. The first few days with the horse felt like a blur of struggle and frustration. Every attempt to bond seemed to fail. The creature was wild, untamed in ways that words couldn't fully capture. It was as if the horse had an impenetrable wall built around its soul, one that no amount of gentle words or attempts at kindness could break through. She had read all the books, watched countless videos, and even consulted with a local trainer before the horse arrived. But none of it prepared her for the reality of standing face to face with an animal who wanted nothing to do with her. The fear and mistrust in the horse's eyes were undeniable. Each time she tried to get closer, it would lash out, either bucking in place or pulling back as if to say, "You can't control me." She spent hours in the barn, sitting quietly just a few feet away from the horse, trying to find a way in. It was exhausting. Each day, her hope seemed to fade a little more. The horse's violent reactions were unnerving. It wasn't just that it didn't trust her, it didn't trust anyone. The animal seemed to resent the world itself. And in those moments, she wondered if it was even possible to change its nature. One morning, after yet another failed attempt to approach the horse, she collapsed on the hay, exhausted both mentally and physically. Her heart was heavy with doubt. What had she gotten herself into? There was so much hope in her heart when the decision was made, but now it felt like the weight of the world was crushing her spirit. She was out of her depth, and the mountain she had chosen to climb was beginning to feel insurmountable. The horse, meanwhile, grazed in the corner of the barn, looking over at her every now and then with a blank stare. The silence between them was thick, almost oppressive, as if neither of them knew how to take the next step forward. On the fourth day, after another unsuccessful attempt to even get near the animal, she decided to try something different. She couldn't rely on conventional methods, she knew that now. She had to listen to the horse, understand its unspoken language, feel its energy instead of just trying to force a connection. But where to start? As she approached the horse cautiously that afternoon, she noticed something, an imperceptible shift in its demeanor. The tension in its muscles had loosened, and its eyes weren't as wide with fear. She stayed still, not daring to make any sudden moves. For the first time, the horse didn't flinch at her presence. She held her breath. Was this a sign? She slowly extended her hand toward it, fingers trembling. The horse shifted slightly, its ears flicking back as if acknowledging her presence. Then, to her surprise, it took a tentative step closer. The woman froze, hardly daring to breathe. She didn't want to spook it again. Another step. Then another. For the next few hours, they stood in silence, her hand just a few inches from the horse's nose. She didn't dare touch it yet. Instead, she let the horse come to her. She knew this was how she would have to approach it, slowly, patiently, without any expectations. This wasn't just about teaching the horse, it was about teaching herself how to trust. Trust the process. Trust the journey. By the time the sun began to set, she had learned something important. The horse, although still wary, wasn't the enemy she had once seen it as. It was a creature with its own fears and insecurities, just like her. It was as though their struggles were mirrored reflections. She was beginning to see that taming the horse wasn't just about controlling it. It was about understanding it, about breaking down the walls of fear that both she and the horse had built over the years. That evening, she felt something shift inside her. There was no grand breakthrough, no dramatic moment. But for the first time since the horse arrived, she felt a spark of hope. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, they could get through this together. As she sat on the edge of the barn that night, gazing out over the fields, she realized the horse wasn't the only one who needed to change. She needed to let go of the doubt and fear that had been weighing her down. She needed to trust in herself, to believe that no challenge was too big to overcome if she faced it with patience and resolve. The days ahead would be filled with difficulty, of course. She knew that. But this small victory, this quiet connection, gave her the strength to face whatever came next. The following days were filled with fleeting moments of progress, but more often than not, the reality of the challenge set in harder than ever. The bond that had seemed so promising on that first day was proving more difficult to nurture than she had anticipated. Every step forward was met with 2 steps back. For every moment of connection, there were more moments of doubt and frustration. The woman started to notice just how much of the horse's behavior mirrored her own inner turmoil. It wasn't just a case of taming a wild animal, it was about taming herself. The horse's unpredictable nature reflected the unpredictability of her own emotions. She had spent years hiding her pain, her fear, her feelings of inadequacy behind a facade of toughness, but now, facing the horse, all of those emotions seemed to spill to the surface. She realized that just like the horse, she was also a creature who had built walls to protect herself. The horse's behavior fluctuated wildly. Some days, it would stand quietly, allowing her to approach with only a cautious step backward, but the next day, it would lunge at the slightest movement, as if challenging her every move. The unpredictability was exhausting. It felt like every step forward was followed by a setback that cut deeper than the last. But she couldn't give up. There was something inside her, something fierce, that refused to accept defeat. Even in the face of doubt, she had come too far to walk away now. Each time the horse reared up or bolted away, she took a deep breath and tried again. She tried to put herself in the horse's shoes, to understand its fears, its pain. She had no idea how to help it, but she knew that if she didn't find a way, the horse would forever remain untamable, and so would she. One afternoon, after another exhausting round of failed attempts to get near the horse, she sat down in the barn and cried. The tears came not just for the horse, but for herself. She felt as though she was fighting a battle on two fronts, one with the horse and the other within herself. The horse wasn't just a creature of flesh and bone, it was a mirror, reflecting her own deepest fears and failures. As she sat in the barn, her face in her hands, something unexpected happened. The horse, for the first time in days, took a slow step toward her. The woman froze. Was it fear or curiosity driving it forward? She couldn't tell. But she remained still, her eyes meeting the horse's as it slowly approached. It stopped a few feet away, its gaze locked with hers. For a long moment, neither of them moved. And in that moment, she realized something: the horse wasn't just afraid of her, it was afraid of the same thing she was, the unknown. The uncertainty of what lay ahead, the fear of failure. With that realization, a shift happened. It wasn't just about the horse anymore. It was about both of them. She had spent so much time focusing on the animal's fear, that she hadn't stopped to acknowledge her own. And just like the horse needed time to trust her, she needed time to trust herself. The next few days passed in a blur of small steps. They didn't make immediate progress, but they made progress nonetheless. She learned how to sit in silence with the horse, how to let it approach her on its own terms. There were days when the horse wouldn't come near her at all, but those were the days when she learned the most. She learned patience, and perhaps more importantly, she learned to forgive herself for her mistakes. By the end of the week, there was a noticeable change. The horse seemed less resistant, less wary. She began to see little signs that the creature was learning to trust her. It would follow her with a little less hesitation, allowing her to gently touch its mane. It was a small victory, but it felt huge. She had been patient enough to earn a sliver of the horse's trust, and in return, the horse had allowed her into its world, a world filled with fear, uncertainty, and a deep, unspoken desire to be understood. She still didn't know how to fully train the horse, and the road ahead was long. But now, she had a renewed sense of purpose. The horse had shown her that change didn't happen overnight, and neither did healing. It took time, patience, and a willingness to confront the fears that had been buried deep inside for so long. But if the horse could learn to trust again, so could she. And that realization was the key to both their healing. The sun hung low over the horizon, casting golden light over the barn. The woman stood just outside the stall, watching the horse with measured patience. She had learned not to rush things. The previous weeks had been filled with frustration, but they had also taught her something invaluable. Progress wasn't measured in grand gestures but in the smallest moments of trust. That morning, something felt different. The air was still, and for the first time, the tension between them didn't feel as heavy. She stepped closer, holding her breath, waiting for the usual resistance, the head tossing, the stomping, the sharp snorts of defiance. But none of it came. Instead, the horse stood still, watching her, its ears twitching slightly but not in alarm. It was waiting, just as she was. This was the moment she had been waiting for. She took another slow step forward, closing the gap between them inch by inch. Then, for the first time, the horse allowed her to reach out and touch its muzzle without pulling away. The warmth of its breath tickled her palm, and a lump rose in her throat. She had spent weeks trying to gain this moment, and now that it was here, it felt almost unreal. She whispered softly, not expecting the horse to understand the words but hoping it would understand the intention. "I know you're scared. I am too." A long, deep exhale came from the horse. It wasn't a sigh of frustration, it was something else. A release. A surrender. Her hands moved slowly along its face, feeling the smooth coat beneath her fingertips. The tension in her own body started to dissipate. It was a quiet victory, one that only she and the horse would understand. But as soon as she thought they had turned a corner, a sudden noise shattered the moment, a loud slam from outside, perhaps the wind knocking over a loose board. The horse flinched violently, rearing back, eyes wide with fear. In an instant it was as if all the progress had vanished. The connection they had shared only moments ago was gone. Her heart pounded as she stepped back, giving the horse space. It was a reminder that trust was fragile, easily broken. But she refused to let doubt creep in. Instead of frustration, she took a deep breath and reassured herself, this wasn't a loss. It was just another test. She spent the rest of the day staying close without pushing. She worked around the barn, talking softly to the horse, letting it get used to her presence again. By nightfall, the horse's fear had settled. It no longer shied away when she passed by. It wasn't the same as before, but it wasn't a complete loss either. That night, she sat outside the barn under the stars, thinking about how much this journey had changed her already. The horse had been labeled untrainable, just as she had once been labeled incapable. People had doubted her, just as they had doubted this animal. Maybe that was why she had chosen this horse, because she saw something of herself in it. As she watched the stars blink in the sky, she whispered to herself, one step at a time. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew one thing for certain, she wasn't giving up. Tomorrow was a new day. A chance to try again. And this time, she was ready for whatever came next. The morning air was crisp as she stepped into the barn, her boots crunching softly against the hay-strewn floor. The horse stood in its usual corner, ears flicking in acknowledgement of her presence, but this time, there was no tension in its stance. No immediate retreat, no sharp, distrustful movements. She had learned to move slowly, to let the horse dictate the pace. So instead of approaching, she settled down onto an old wooden stool a few feet away, pretending to busy herself with a small task. She spoke softly, more to fill the quiet than to get a response. "I know yesterday was scary," she murmured, glancing at the horse from the corner of her eye. "But we're still here, aren't we?" The horse let out a quiet huff, lowering its head slightly, not quite relaxed, but not rigid with tension either. Then, something happened that she wasn't expecting. The horse took a step toward her. Her breath hitched, but she kept herself still. She knew better than to move too soon, too fast. Another step. Then another. By the time she realized what was happening, the horse was standing right in front of her, its large, dark eyes locked onto hers. It was waiting. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her hand. The horse flinched slightly but didn't move away. Her fingers brushed against its muzzle, and instead of pulling back, it stayed. The connection was fragile, but it was real. A lump formed in her throat as she stroked the horse's face, feeling the warmth of its skin beneath her fingertips. This wasn't just about training anymore. This was about trust, real, earned trust. And then, as if sensing the shift between them, the horse did something that nearly brought tears to her eyes. It leaned into her touch. For the first time, the horse wasn't resisting. It wasn't recoiling. It was accepting. She let out a shaky breath, overwhelmed by the moment. Weeks of struggle, of setbacks, of feeling like she was fighting a losing battle, and now, here they were. A single moment of pure, unspoken understanding. "I told you we could do this," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to the horse or to herself. But just as quickly as the moment arrived, it ended. A rustling noise from outside made the horse snap back, its body tensing, the old fear returning. It took a step away, shaking its head as if it had realized its mistake. She swallowed her disappointment, forcing herself to remain steady. "It's okay," she said softly. "We'll try again tomorrow." And for the first time since this journey began, she truly believed that tomorrow would bring something better. The days blended together in a steady rhythm, mornings spent greeting the horse with calm, quiet words, afternoons filled with small, cautious steps toward building trust. She started to notice patterns, when the horse was most receptive, when it needed space, and when it was willing to engage. These subtle cues became her guide, teaching her how to move, when to wait, and how to read the animal's emotions. It was no longer just a process of training. It was a relationship. She began introducing gentle exercises, nothing too demanding, just walking side by side, showing the horse that not every interaction needed to be a battle. She learned to celebrate the smallest victories, a moment when the horse didn't flinch at her approach, the first time it let her lead it a few steps without resistance. Each small breakthrough gave her hope, but more importantly, it deepened the connection between them. The horse wasn't just responding out of habit or instinct. It was beginning to trust her, to choose her. One morning, as they walked together in the paddock, the horse nudged her shoulder lightly. It was a small gesture, almost playful. She stopped in her tracks, turning to look at the animal. "Well, that's new," she said, her voice tinged with a mixture of surprise and delight. The horse's ears flicked forward, its eyes calm and steady. For the first time, she saw something in its gaze that hadn't been there before: acceptance. From that day on, their progress came more quickly. The horse began to follow her lead without hesitation. She could sense its unease fading. There were still moments of uncertainty, but the walls were coming down, slowly but surely. And yet, the journey wasn't without its challenges. There were times when the horse reverted to old behaviors, pulling back suddenly, spooking at a noise, or refusing to move forward. On those days, she had to remind herself that progress wasn't always linear. It took patience and persistence, and she was learning that she had plenty of both. What surprised her most was how much the horse was teaching her. The more time she spent with it, the more she realized that the lessons extended far beyond the barn. She found herself becoming more patient in other areas of her life, more willing to listen and understand before reacting. The challenges she faced with the horse mirrored the challenges she faced within herself, learning to let go of fear, to trust the process, and to believe in the possibility of change. By the end of each day, she felt a growing sense of gratitude. The horse, once labeled untrainable and wild, was proving that no one is beyond redemption. It wasn't just about taming a difficult animal, it was about finding a connection, understanding its fears, and helping it find its place in the world. There was still a long road ahead. The horse's journey to complete trust and comfort wasn't over. But now, she could see the path clearly. It wasn't about dominance or control. It was about partnership, about proving to the horse that she would never give up, no matter how tough it got. And with each step forward, she realized something else: this journey wasn't just healing the horse. It was healing her. The day finally arrived when she felt ready to put all their progress to the test. The local community was holding a small showcase for horse trainers and owners, a chance for people to demonstrate the bond they had developed with their animals. It wasn't about competition or winning ribbons, it was about showing the world how far they had come. She had been preparing for this moment for weeks, practicing the simple routines that she hoped would demonstrate the trust and connection she had built with the horse. But as the morning sunlight filtered through the barn's wooden beams, she felt the familiar pull of doubt. Was she pushing the horse too soon? Would it regress under the pressure? She stepped into the stall, running her hand along the horse's neck. The animal had grown accustomed to her touch, no longer flinching or pulling away. In fact, it leaned slightly into her hand, as if to reassure her. "We can do this," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "I know we can." At the event, the grounds were buzzing with activity. Riders and their horses trotted across the arena, some performing intricate routines, others simply showing off their calm, well-trained companions. She tried to focus on her breathing as she led the horse toward the staging area. The crowd didn't seem to notice her at first, and that was fine by her. She wasn't here for attention. She was here for a moment of truth, a chance to show herself and the horse how far they had come. When her turn came, she led the horse into the arena. The noise of the crowd was unfamiliar, and she felt the animal's tension immediately. Its ears twitched, its head lifted higher than usual, and for a split second, she thought it might panic. "Easy," she murmured, keeping her step steady and her movements calm. "We've got this." As she started the routine, a hush seemed to fall over the crowd. She wasn't performing tricks or stunts, she was simply walking with the horse, showing the trust they had built. She guided it through basic maneuvers, stopping, turning, following her lead without a rope. Each step felt monumental, and with every movement, she could feel the horse's tension ease. When the routine ended, the horse stood beside her, its head low and relaxed. A soft murmur of applause rippled through the audience, but she hardly noticed. She turned to the horse, resting her hand gently on its neck. "We did it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The showcase wasn't about proving something to the world, it was about proving something to themselves. The horse, once labeled untamable, had shown that it could learn to trust, to connect, to overcome its fears. And she had proven to herself that she could do the same. That evening, back at the barn, she sat with the horse under the warm glow of the setting sun. It stood close to her, no longer wary of her presence. In that quiet moment, she realized that the true victory wasn't the performance itself. It was the journey they had taken to get there. She looked into the horse's dark eyes, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. "You've taught me more than I ever thought possible," she said softly. The horse huffed, shifting its weight slightly, as if it understood. They still had a long road ahead, but she knew one thing for certain, they were in it together. As the days turned into weeks, the woman and the horse found a rhythm. What once felt like an insurmountable task now felt like a steady, meaningful partnership. The horse grew calmer and more confident in her presence, and she found a sense of purpose and fulfillment she hadn't felt in years. The success of their training became the talk of the small local community. Word spread quickly, neighbors who had once thought her foolish now came to see the horse for themselves. She noticed how they marveled at its transformation, how they commented on its calm demeanor, its steady movements. There was no denying it, the once untrainable horse was now a model of grace and trust. But as her confidence grew, so did the responsibilities. Requests poured in. Friends and acquaintances who owned troubled horses asked her for help. Strangers reached out, hoping she could do for their animals what she had done for her own. Her once quiet life turned unexpectedly busy, and while she appreciated the recognition, it brought challenges she hadn't anticipated. Some days she found herself juggling too much, taking calls, scheduling sessions, running errands to accommodate the growing interest in her story. The quiet time she once cherished with her horse became harder to come by, and she began to feel the weight of new expectations. She could see it in the horse's behavior too. The constant stream of new faces and changes to their routine began to unsettle the animal. The trust they had built felt fragile again, as though it might crack under the strain. She knew she had to make a choice. What had started as a personal journey of redemption and trust had grown into something she hadn't planned. She could continue down this path of newfound popularity and the pressures it brought, or she could return to what mattered most, the simple, meaningful connection she had forged with her horse. After much reflection, she decided to step back. She turned down requests, reduced her commitments, and focused on what brought her joy and peace. She returned to the barn each morning with no expectations, no schedule, just the quiet presence of the horse that had changed her life. Slowly, the calm returned, both for her and for the animal. The horse's gaze softened once more, and she felt the same bond they had shared in those early, quiet days. Her choice came with its own rewards. The woman found balance, rediscovering the joy of simply being present. She realized that the true success of her journey wasn't about gaining recognition or proving others wrong, it was about learning to trust, to be patient, and to find contentment in the process itself. And so, as the season turned and the days grew longer, the woman and the horse settled into a new chapter. They had reached a place of mutual understanding, a quiet companionship that needed no audience. The unexpected attention and new responsibilities had taught her valuable lessons, but in the end, it was the quiet moments, just her and the horse, that meant the most. As the woman walked into the barn one last time, the early morning light casting long shadows on the floor, she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The horse stood calmly in its stall, ears flicking toward her as she approached. She reached out to stroke its neck, her movement steady and familiar. This was more than just a bond between human and animal. It was a story of redemption, of resilience, of finding strength in the face of doubt. The horse, once deemed untamable, now stood as a living symbol of trust and perseverance. And as she ran her fingers through its mane, she realized something profound: the transformation had been mutual. When she had first brought the horse home, she had been lost, filled with uncertainty and doubt. She had seen herself in the animal, wild, guarded, and afraid to let anyone in. The countless hours spent earning the horse's trust had taught her more than any book or advice ever could. She had learned that progress wasn't about quick fixes or forcing change. It was about patience, understanding, and small, consistent efforts. The horse had forced her to slow down, to listen, to pay attention. It had shown her that every creature, no matter how broken, deserved a chance. And in giving the horse that chance, she had given herself one too. The struggles they faced together had been more than training exercises. They were lessons in perseverance. In those moments of failure, when the horse had refused to cooperate, she had learned to dig deeper, to try again, to approach the problem from a different angle. And each time she found a solution, however small, it felt like a triumph not just for the horse, but for herself. As the months turned into a year, she had become a different person. She was more confident, more patient, and more at peace. The doubts that had plagued her before, those nagging voices telling her she wasn't good enough, had grown quiet. In their place was a newfound belief that she could overcome challenges, no matter how daunting they seemed. The horse, too, had changed. No longer wild and defiant, it was now calm and steady, trusting her to guide it. The journey they had taken together had transformed it from an unruly creature into a loyal companion. And the bond they shared went beyond words. It was an unspoken understanding, a connection built on trust, patience, and mutual respect. Looking back, she realized that the initial goal, proving everyone wrong, had faded away. What mattered now wasn't what others thought or said. What mattered was the quiet, steady rhythm of the life she and the horse had created together. The long days in the barn, the peaceful walks through the paddock, the silent moments of connection, these were the real victories. In the end, she understood that the horse had given her more than she had ever hoped to give it. It had taught her that the greatest rewards in life come not from rushing to the finish line, but from embracing the journey itself. It had shown her the power of persistence, the value of patience, and the strength that comes from believing in yourself, even when the odds seem impossible. As she leaned against the stall, watching the horse gently nuzzle the hay, a sense of calm washed over her. She had taken a chance on something others had deemed impossible. She had faced frustration, doubt, and fear, but she had never given up. And in doing so, she had proven something not just to herself, but to anyone willing to listen. Sometimes, the most untrainable challenges in life hold the greatest lessons. And so, with a heart full of gratitude, she stepped out of the barn and into the sunlight, knowing that she and the horse had forever changed each other's lives.